An impoverished childhood and lousy upbringing is often used as an excuse by serial murderers in an attempt to make witnesses to their stories feel sorry for them. Plenty of people have shitty lives growing up, but not everyone makes the choice to be a serial killer. Our killer today was responsible for the death of at least 3, but more likely 5 babies that were in her care as a babysitter. According to her own testimony, she heard voices that told her to kill the babies by smothering them. To this day, no one knows the motive of the then youngest serial killer in US history, killer babysitter Christine Falling from Florida, USA.
Welcome to Veritas True Crime Podcast.
Hi everyone and welcome to Veritas True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to talk about Christine Falling from Florida. Falling is a convicted child murderer and she's still currently serving out her life sentence in prison. She's one of the youngest serial killers, or at least she was, in United States history. A bit of warning, some people may find the details of this episode triggering, so please use your discretion while listening. A quick note, although there are plenty of resources around the internet, I recently came across a comment from someone related to one of Christine Falling's victims. It appears that the family feel as though true crime podcasts and videos on sites around the web are trying to capitalize on the murder of their little girl. I've therefore made the decision to omit the name of the little girl from this podcast out of respect for the family so as not to cause them any further pain and suffering. In doing so, I'm not minimizing or dismissing the death of that child. Her death plays a vital role in our story, and it would be irresponsible not to mention that the murderer took her young life. Here's the thing. As I researched this story, the lady's comments were appearing everywhere, on all of the True Crime Podcast episodes and YouTube videos about Christine Falling. Mistakenly, this person decided to be quite nasty to the people telling this story, as if these people had set out to deliberately cause harm or hurt to her family. And I'm here to tell you right now that abuse and name-calling will get you nowhere. I'm just one person and I've decided to spare your family any further pain by omitting your loved one's name from this episode. But the reality is this: that little girl was murdered by this piece of shit Christine Falling, and I'm sorry that your family went through this, but it is inevitable that therefore she now plays forever a part in this story. She is and always will be known as the first victim of Christine Falling. It's unfortunate. It never should have happened, but there's no escaping that one fact. No one is going out of their way to hurt you and your family or trying to use your loved one's death as a marketing exercise. In fact, I've found that it's been quite the opposite. Not one of the people that you've called names such as disgusting, leeches, or deranged, or other hurtful names did anything more than just mention your family member as a victim and then moved right on to tell the rest of the story. Believe me, I feel for you, and I'm sure that everyone who tells this story feels similarly. They've never wanted your loved one to be murdered. She looked like, and by your own admission, was a beautiful child, the light of your entire family, and her loss caused you all deep sorrow and pain. I refuse to believe that by telling this story, people are trying to capitalize or sensationalize her death. For you, I wish healing and that your misdirected anger towards the people telling this story will pass and that you can move on and make your life a happy and balanced one. I say this with love, not with the same anger and spite that you seem to have spilled all over the internet towards people who really, in the reality of it all, did you absolutely no harm whatsoever. In closing, if you wish to talk about this with me, about your loved one, about these murders, or about this piece of shit murderer, I welcome you to tell your story. I extend an open invitation to you, and you can contact me via the podcast page, our website, or on Facebook. She was born Christine Laverne Slaughter into a poor family in Perry, Florida on March 12, 1963. Her parents were the 16-year-old Anne and 65-year-old Thomas Slaughter. The couple had already had another child, Christine's older sister, Carol. 65-year-old Slaughter was a woodsman. He was violent and inattentive to his family. Within just a few years of her birth, their mother had two more children, Michael and Earl. Michael was likely born to another man. The only child that was recognized by Thomas Slaughter as being biologically his was Earl. Anne was an absent mother. She would spend a lot of time away from the home and from her children, sometimes for months at a time. Thomas did the best that he could to raise them, but his best was far from good enough. He had to work, so he would take his children with him while he was chopping wood. After Thomas was injured in an accident whilst working, Anne begrudgingly came home to the family. But she couldn't handle the children, and one day she took them for a drive in the car and left them on a bench at a shopping mall. Abandoned and alone, the boys began a life of being shipped to live in different foster homes, and the girls would finally be adopted. Dolly Falling had always dreamed of having children of her own. It had been her dream since she was a child. Dolly's husband Jesse knew of the Slaughter boys, and so the two decided that they would only adopt Christine and Carol. The girls both took the Falling last name. In the beginning, it seemed as though things were going well for the children, and they were seemingly happy in the Falling home. Christine had been diagnosed with epilepsy. Her empty gaze caused fear in people. She was unable to form meaningful bonds, and she'd started to become increasingly antisocial. By now, Falling was already showing signs of bizarre behavior. She was disturbed, and her experience with killing came very early. One of her favorite pastimes was killing and torturing cats to test if they really had 9 lives. To show them her love, she would strangle them to death. It's also recorded that she would drop the animals from extreme heights to test them. Her childhood was plagued by abuse and instability, and clearly this was her way of dealing with her anger. Eventually, Dolly and Jesse Falling were fed up, and they took Falling and her sister Carol to Great Oaks Village, a home for troubled children near Orlando, Florida. It was reported that Jesse Falling had actually been arrested twice for sexually abusing Carol. The first incident made it to court, but it ended up with a hung jury, and in the second incident, Dolly decided to drop the charges against her husband. The caretakers at Great Oaks Village described Falling as being an habitual liar, a compulsive thief, and a child who would break the rules just for the attention that it would get her. She failed to make substantial relationships with the other children in the home, and many of those children were bullying her for her weight, her poor social and intellectual skills. Christine would often get into trouble just because it allowed her to get some attention from someone. Throughout her childhood, Falling also suffered from being obese, and it's likely that the medication she was taking for her seizures was one of the reasons that she experienced trouble with her weight. She was unable to develop skills beyond those of a 6th grader. She'd attempted suicide a couple of times by slashing her wrists and by overdosing on pills. In October 1975, it seemed as though things had calmed down both for Christine and for Carol, and they returned to the home of Dolly and Jesse Falling. However, this only lasted a short time because a violent altercation between Christine and Jesse erupted, and Jesse beat Christine violently. The attack was all because Christine was home 10 minutes late. It resulted in punches, kicks, and slaps raining down on Christine. Jesse then forced her to wear shorts to school the following day, just so that people could see the marks of justice, as he put it. The next day, the two girls ran away. The sisters ended up staying at a friend of Carol's, and after 6 weeks, at just 12 years of age, Falling decided that she was going to go in search of her mother, Anne. Carol also decided that she would become independent and get herself a job. Christine Falling managed to locate her mother in Blountstown, Calhoun County, Florida, and she remained living there for at least the next 2 years. Her relationship with her mother, however, was strained, and the two barely got along. Christine at this time weighed more than 220 pounds or 100 kilos, and she still suffered from behavioral issues. When she was just 14 years old in September 1977, Falling married a man in his 20s. Now, there's a lot of conflicting information regarding this particular marriage. Firstly, the man that she married was Goober Falling. That was her stepbrother. Some reports say that she was forced to marry Goober, but others say that she married him willingly, so we don't know. Regardless of how the pair came to be together, their marriage was doomed from the beginning, and it only lasted 6 weeks. They were plagued by violence and chaos. During one of their many violent arguments between the pair, Falling threw a stereo which weighed 25 pounds or 11 kilos at her husband. Eventually, the pair separated permanently. The disaster of this relationship brought with it even more bizarre behaviour from Falling. Obviously, she was suffering from mental health issues, and Falling attended the local hospital more than 50 times over the following 2 years, with an endless array of strange medical conditions that she had made up. These ranged from red spots to vaginal bleeding, which ended up being her period, and even snake bites, which could never be properly diagnosed by the medical professionals. Following thorough examinations by doctors, Falling would continually show up with inexplicable and rapidly changing symptoms, which would ultimately end up with her being sent home without being treated or given any medication. Possibly this was another cry for attention from someone who was clearly being starved of it. Falling most likely should have been diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome, which is a psychological disorder where the patient makes up illnesses and diseases in order to get medical attention. People with Munchausen's often hurt themselves and invent symptoms just to achieve their goal of being seen by medical professionals. Alone and without an education, clearly suffering from mental health issues, Falling needed an income. It's well documented that she loved children. Family and friends commented that she was great with kids. She managed to find work as a babysitter for local families, and over time, she developed a reputation for being a loving caregiver who did a great job caring for her clients' children. This work allowed Falling to earn herself money, and she was able to build herself a nice business in childminding. It was February 25th, 1980. Falling was now 17 years old, and she was babysitting a 2-year-old girl. She'd been hired by the girl's parents a few days earlier when they interviewed Falling to help out with looking after their baby while they needed to go to work. Obviously, Falling had been charming and convinced the couple enough to hire her. It was Monday, and as agreed, Christine arrived early at the couple's home. Just 4 hours later, this family would be forever changed. Suddenly, the baby had stopped breathing and she was unconscious. She was being rushed to the Tallahassee hospital by ambulance with what was assumed to be life-threatening symptoms from encephalitis. Doctors detected a bump on her little head, and this girl had swelling on her brain. Falling explained all of that away and said that she'd gotten the bump on her head when she fell unconscious. 3 days later, though, she sadly died in the hospital. Falling played the part of a distraught and caring nanny. The family of this little girl were robbed of a shining light, and no one in a position of authority thought that they needed to open an investigation into her death immediately. An autopsy, however, revealed that in fact she did have blunt force trauma to her skull, and immediately an investigation was underway, with local authorities shining the light on Falling as their prime suspect. Falling, however, told the police that the 2-year-old had toppled from her crib while she had been out of the room, and that Falling had found her unconscious when she came back to check on her. The police at first didn't believe a word of this. However, with no evidence to contradict her version of events, and the matter therefore wasn't pursued any further. Just a few days later, Falling was babysitting 3-year-old Kyle Summerlin. After showing worrying symptoms and becoming critically ill, he too was rushed to hospital. Thankfully, he survived, and the doctors made a diagnosis of meningitis. Immediately, Falling stopped babysitting Kyle. After this, Falling decided that she was going to pack up and move from Blountstown to Lakeland, Florida. Lakeland is about 5 hours from Blountstown, east of Tampa. To support herself, again, Falling took up babysitting jobs. Within just 2 short months of moving to Lakeland, Falling had little 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis in her care. Jeffrey suddenly stopped breathing and died. There'd been no previous signs of illness, and Jeffrey had been, by all accounts, a healthy young boy. There were immediate suspicions around Falling, and an autopsy on Jeffrey was carried out. The medical examiner determined that the boy had suffered from a medical condition that caused his heart to be chronically enlarged. This was deemed sufficient as a cause of death, and the investigation into Falling once again was closed. A few days later, the uncle and aunt of Jeffrey approached Falling and asked if she would look after their 2-year-old son Joseph, Joe Boy, Spring, in order for them to attend Jeffrey's funeral. While at the funeral, Falling placed little Joe Boy down to take a nap. It was during this nap that inexplicably he died. Falling said that he awoke with a scream and was, quote, dead before I got to the bedroom, end quote. It was speculated by one of the physicians, though, that Joe Boy had died from a virus, and this same virus may have been the reason for little Jeffrey's death. As a result, no further investigation into the deaths of the 2 little boys. Just 2 weeks later, Falling was being hospitalized for a viral infection in her digestive tract. This was the same virus which had been found in Joe Boy's autopsy. So for a short time, it was believed that Falling was a modern-day Typhoid Mary. People truly believed that this girl was plagued by misfortune, and so she was able to maintain her job as a babysitter. Once again, Falling was free to leave the area, and she did so, moving to live with relatives in Perry, Florida, where she was born. There, she was looking after 3-year-old Charles Heil and his 4-month-old brother, Jeffrey. While in her care, both of the children became mysteriously ill and were hospitalized. Thankfully, though, both of them recovered. By July 1981, there were rumors circulating about Falling. She had convinced the parents of the deceased children that she was cursed. Any child that she looked after would end up dead. This was starting to make it difficult for Falling to find babysitting jobs, obviously. So she went and secured a position as a nursing assistant for senior citizens, and her first client was 77-year-old Wilbur Swindle. Wilbur had cancer. However, he ended up dying in his kitchen on Falling's first day at work. Falling was expected to do some light cleaning, organization of the house, cooking, grocery shopping, and of course to keep Wilbur company. When the paramedics arrived, Wilbur was lying on the floor. His death, the paramedics suspected, was a heart attack. Due to his age and his previous medical history, there was no further investigation into his death, no matter how inexplicable it seemed to be. Just a short time later, on July 14th, 1981, Falling was accompanying her half-sister Betty to the doctor's office with Betty's daughter, Jennifer Daniels. Little Jennifer was about 8 months old and was due to receive some vaccinations, so it was a pretty routine visit to the doctor's office. On their way home, Betty needed to stop at the supermarket for diapers and some food, so she left baby Jennifer in the car with Falling. She said she was only going to be a few minutes and she didn't want to take Jennifer out into the hot summer sun. When Daniels returned to her car, Falling announced, quote, "The baby's not breathing," end quote. But she told Daniels that this was normal, that babies don't breathe hard. When Daniels took a closer look, she found that not only was Jennifer not breathing, she was blue. It was Falling's story that Jennifer had just stopped breathing. The investigation was closed, with Jennifer's death being ruled as Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, or SIDS. In other words, it was determined that her death was of natural causes, and so no further investigation took place. People who knew Falling, her family, neighbors, doctors, and even police said that this was all just hard luck. Falling was a victim of circumstance. Babies died all the time in the ramshackle towns where Falling had made her living, taking care of the young'uns, as she called them. They all insisted that she would never have harmed a child because she loved children. People continued to trust her. Falling's own sister, Carol, had also lost a child to SIDS. She said Falling had nothing to do with it. She treated her daughter just like she was her own. On July 2nd, 1982, another child in Falling's care suddenly stopped breathing without explanation. 10-week-old Travis Dwayne Coleman had recently recovered from pneumonia, and after a lengthy hospital stay, he was finally allowed to come home again. Lisa Coleman, Travis's mother, had left Travis at Falling's home, which she shared with her boyfriend, Robert. Once again, Falling was counting on her explanation of SIDS as being the reason for this infant's death, and that would carry her and get her out of this pickle. Travis's mother, Lisa, cooperated with investigators, and she agreed to have an autopsy. And it was during this autopsy that it was discovered Travis had died from injuries that only could have occurred with suffocation, including multiple internal ruptures. Falling told the police that she had given Travis his formula at around 3 a.m. and changed him before she put him back to bed. At first it was considered that maybe Falling was the carrier of a disease that was responsible for killing these children. However, the investigation soon turned to the possibility that this was going to be a murder. The medical examiner, however, called it an oddity of occurrence. On July 22, 1982, Christine Falling was arrested for the murder of Travis Coleman. When taken into custody, she was immediately, without any protests, given a psychiatric assessment at a mental health hospital. Her description of the method of murder was, quote, smotheration. She claimed, though, that she had heard voices yelling at her, telling her to murder the child by placing a blanket over his face. Investigators decided that it was going to be very difficult to prove that Falling was responsible for the deaths of the other children, but she was formally charged with the murder of the 2-year-old baby in 1980, her relative Jennifer Daniels, and Travis Coleman. Falling continued to deny any knowledge of the other children or Wilbur Swindle, who had all died in her care, but she willingly and repeatedly admitted to the killing of the 3 children that she'd previously confessed to, and she would be convicted for. Due to her confession and officially pleading guilty on September 17, 1982, it was agreed in a plea bargain that the state would not pursue the death penalty against Falling, and by her pleading guilty, she also avoided a trial. In a recorded confession, Falling said about Travis's murder, quote, I just choked him, no apparent reason. I just picked him off his pallet and choked him to death and laid him back down, end quote. She said the other children died in the same way, adding, quote, I killed them, that's all I gotta say, I don't know why, close quote. It was admitted by prosecutors that without her confession, charges may have never even been laid against Falling. At the time of her confession, Falling was just 19 years old. She was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison, however, she would be eligible for parole after 25 years. To this day, and during questioning, Falling has never offered any motive for her killing spree. She said that she'd done it as she had seen it done on TV. She said, quote, I don't know why I done what I done. The way I done I seen it done on TV shows. I had my own way though, simple and easy, no one would hear them scream, end quote. Just 3 years into her 2 life sentences, Falling finally made a confession to, quote, squeezing the life out of 77-year-old Wilbur Swindle. His death had previously been suspected to have been from a heart attack. In 2006, Falling applied for parole. Due to the nature of her crimes and having had previous behavioral issues in prison, her application was thankfully denied. In 2017, again she applied for parole. No one came to support Falling at the hearing. The prosecutors in the case argued that Falling deserved no mercy and called her the babysitter from hell. Again, thankfully, her parole was denied. The laws allow for her to apply for parole again in 2024 when she'll be 61 years old. We can only hope that she'll continue to be denied the freedom that she seeks, and she doesn't deserve. What she does deserve is to spend the rest of her rotten life in prison. Effectively, Christine Falling's release date is 2254, when she's 291 years old, and she will hopefully be long dead by then, and even that is too soon. When asked, the reasons that she gave for killing the children are all as obscure as they are random. Here's what she had to say for each of the children that she murdered. For the first child in 1980, Falling said, quote, she was very loud. She'd gotten kind of rowdy or something, close quote. For Jeffrey, she said, because he drove me crazy. He made me mad or something. I was already mad that morning, so I just took it out on him and started choking him till he was dead. For Joe Boy, she said, I didn't know what happened. He was napping when I got the impulse and I wanted to kill him. I just got the urge. For baby Jennifer, she said, she was continually crying and crying and crying and it drove me crazy, so I just put my hands around her neck and choked her until she shut up. For little Travis Coleman, she said, I just smothered him. No apparent reason. Shortly after her arrest, Falling gave an interview with the Tallahassee Democrat where she said to the reports that she just tried to keep her mind off it as much as she could. At that time, friends and family were still saying that she was innocent and that she just must have been a victim of circumstance or bad luck. Falling said, I've been through it with 5 young'uns. I don't know what's happening. It's enough to scare you. Falling, though, knew what she was doing. She hid behind mental illness to try and mitigate her guilt, but ultimately, she knew what she was doing. During her time in prison, Falling's doctors have rejected the claims that she was hearing voices. Within no time at all, she returned to her old habit of visiting the prison medical bay for mysterious illnesses and symptoms which just didn't exist. No official diagnosis of Munchausen's was ever made, but at her parole hearing in 2007, a doctor did say that they thought she had it and therefore she posed a significant risk to the public. This time, I've been collecting some cold cases from my hometown in Adelaide. Some of them were going to become episodes for the show, and for one reason or another, just didn't make it to that point. The following are media releases from Australia's Crime Stoppers show and website. The stories have flopped in one way or another. Either I couldn't get enough information to turn them into a full episode, or I was asked not to produce the episode by various family members when I reached out to them. All of the information that you're about to hear was released publicly by the South Australian Police. I did not add any of my own research to the stories, and I do not own any of the content. It's being reproduced here for educational purposes under the Fair Use Guidelines in Australian copyright law. A caller to Crime Stoppers in December 2016 may hold vital information in relation to the unsolved murder of mother of 4, Emily May Wanganeen. The 41-year-old who lived a transient lifestyle with no fixed address and carrying her personal belongings with her in a green supermarket bag was a familiar figure to people living in the Salisbury and Elizabeth areas of Adelaide. She was a heavy drinker and reportedly an illicit drug user. She would stay with friends and family in Adelaide's north, with the last confirmed sighting of her being on February 27, 2010. Emily was walking on Tolmer Road at Elizabeth Park, and it's believed that this was only a short time before she was murdered. Wanganeen was reported missing by family members on March 17, 2010, and on June 13th her body was discovered by youths who were out walking their dog. The body was found in a steep gully near a quarry on Blacktop Road in Gold Creek. Her wandering lifestyle and lack of structure created challenges for the police who were investigating her murder. A detective from the South Australian Police Major Crime Investigations branch said Miss Wanganeen's lifestyle had contributed to the delay in her being reported missing and had also led to little information being provided to police about her death. It's believed that within her circle of associates or former associates that there are people talking about her death, and those people are being urged to come forward and talk to the police. Investigators who reviewed the case as part of Operation Persist haven't revealed the exact way that Ms. Wanganeen had died, but they said the surrounding circumstances indicated that she was in fact murdered. Her body was found in a steep, isolated area that was difficult to get to, and there was no suggestion that she would have gone to that area alone for any other reason. Wanganeen's body was found completely naked, her clothing nearby, along with her bag which contained her personal belongings. Police did take statements from a number of people, including her on-again, off-again long-term boyfriend. However, they were unable to identify a firm suspect in the case. It's also been suggested by police that Ms. Wanganeen may have owed money for drugs and that was one line of inquiry that was never discounted. The detective said that relationships change over the years, so anyone who was within the loose network of people that knew Emily was being asked to consider coming forward to speak with police about anything that they knew. Since 2018, a $200,000 reward is being made available to anyone who provides information leading to the apprehension and conviction of the person responsible for Ms. Wanganeen's death. I reached out to Emily's family, but I didn't receive a reply. I had intended to run a full episode about her case, but given that I couldn't get any further information, I had to settle for bringing light to her case once again, and hoping that someone out there has that one piece of intelligence that will bring peace to her loving family. Operation Persist is a long-running police campaign focused on reviewing and progressing unsolved murders using a range of tactics including case reviews, media campaigns, reward offers, public appeals for information, the re-examination of forensic evidence, and targeting information from people within prisons. South Australia Police were invited to participate in the making of this episode, but the invitation was refused. On Tuesday, the 16th of April 1991, at around 10:30 p.m, David Saint, who was commonly known as John, was bashed to death in Adelaide's South Parklands near the CBD. Detectives investigating the unsolved murder are keeping an open mind as to the motive. However, they acknowledge that he may have been attacked because of his sexuality. The area where he was murdered was known as a meeting spot for gay men. The officer in charge of the South Australian Police Major Crime Investigation Branch appealed for anyone with information about this senseless murder or other crimes in that area that could be related to please contact the police. He said, "If people contact us, they will see that they will be treated differently to how they may have been in the past." He said, "Times have changed." Investigating detectives said that advances in DNA technology may help to provide police with answers in relation to the case, and some material collected from the crime scene was going to be subjected to further forensic testing. The main item that police are wanting to have retested is the brick that is believed to be the murder weapon with which David was assaulted. Initially, police believed that robbery was a possible motive in this case, but David's wallet was found on him and still had $300 cash inside. At the time of the murder, there had been multiple reports of gay bashings in that same area, so police are following this as the strongest line in relation to motive. A detective on the case said, "We know that some of the men who would frequent this area were married, and one of the issues for us is, because of the nature of their activity there, a lot of incidents that we are aware of anecdotally weren't formally reported to the police." 3 offenders were seen assaulting and then chasing Mr. Saint across the road before continuing their attack on him. 2 people did try to intervene, but the attackers told them to butt out. They only came forward to the police the following day when they became aware that there had been a murder. It's highly likely that the suspects would have boasted about their activities that night in April, and maybe there are people who have wanted to come forward but were put off by the media attention given to the case around that time. Anyone with information is being urged to please speak to South Australia Police, with the detective saying that it has never been acceptable to do what these men did to Mr. Saint. Strategies with cold case investigations include working with media partners to highlight particular cases, detailed case reviews, the retesting of forensic material, the release of playing cards highlighting cold case matters into South Australian prisons, and the providing of additional rewards by the state government. A reward of up to $200,000 is being offered by the Government of South Australia at the discretion of the Commissioner of Police to anyone who will provide information and assistance which will lead to the conviction of the person or people responsible for the suspected murder of David John Saint. If you have any information that can help with the previous cold cases, you are urged to contact Crime Stoppers in Australia on 1800 333 000 or visit the website crimestoppersa.com.au. Remember, your tip may help bring peace to the loved ones seeking answers. You can always remain anonymous. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Remember to drop by our Facebook page and click like to be updated on the latest episodes and news, or visit us on the web at veritastruecrime.com. If you'd like to get in touch, make a suggestion for an episode, or maybe just say hello and let me know where you're listening from. Remember, the truth is mighty and it will prevail. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, friends.